Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Hello everyone, this is Andrew and Daphne from Generation to Generation, and our guest today is Doug Hershey. Doug, for people that don't know who you are, can you just say a bit about where you're from and what you do?
Yeah, I live in Portland, Maine. Well, prior to COVID, I live in Portland, Maine, but prior to COVID, I was spending probably 6 to 7 months of every year in Israel. I own a travel company called Ezra Adventures that does small group adventure travel to Israel, Jordan, and while those places are trying to figure out what they're doing, we're now in Turkey and soon to be Greece. But I also wrote 2 books, one called Israel Rising, another called Jerusalem Rising, which is brand new. They're part of the Ancient Prophecy Modern Lens series that provides visual documentation of ancient prophecy captured through a modern lens. So giving people like some very visual things that prophecy is unfolding in a very practical and tangible way right now in our lifetime. And so between Ezra Adventures, travel and writing and speaking, and speaking about kind of helping people tie together the fact that Bible prophecy is not something that's abstract and far away, but it's something that is very tangible and practical and happening right now. So that that keeps me busy.
And then for people listening to this, they want to find out more, maybe about the tour stuff, although how COVID affects all that, who knows, but they can still go check it out, or your books. Where can they do that?
Yeah, 2 sites. If you're interested in the travel portion, EzraAdventures.com. So we're or on Facebook or Instagram, EzraAdventures.com. If you're interested in the photos or the photo documentation and with the photo books, then and now photography of Israel, DougHershey.co. And so on that site as well, I have an online course and some other books and some other things, but that's where a lot of my content and resources is based, is DougHershey.co.
Okay, and I'll put those links in the description box, so if you're listening, they're there ready for you to go and check out.
Excellent.
So we haven't met. I have to admit, I hadn't really heard about you before, even though we've discovered we have many mutual friends. But I'm the sort of person that sees a book and either it's grabbed me almost on the front cover or it's passed me by. And I saw your book, Jerusalem Rising, and I was immediately captivated by it. I flicked through it online, I think, and I thought, oh my goodness, we have to have you on. And it was from that we invited you to come, and we're very, very grateful that you did. So, Doug, can you take us back a bit? What inspired you to do these books? I mean, why? I write books, but I've never thought of doing that. Why did you do it? What propelled you forward?
Well, it was really part of my own sort of personal journey and personal life. I think that sometimes people ask me expecting like a story about like an angel handed me a golden scroll and like this is what you're supposed to do. But life rarely works like that.
No.
And so I had just been starting this travel company, Ezra Adventures. I was taking a group down the Jordan Valley from the Galilee down to the Dead Sea, down Highway 90. And I was describing to them about how that you go from the plush Galilean farmland, rich soil, and within an hour and a half drive, it turns into just desolate, empty desert down to the Dead Sea, the lowest place on earth. And I was telling them as we were driving, we're going to turn around a corner, or we're going to turn to this bend, or a little bit ahead, you're going to see the landscape begin to change. And it had been a few years since I'd been there at that point. And we went around that bend or further down the road, and everything was still green. And and I thought, well, maybe I'm not remembering. Don't worry, everybody. In a few miles, it'll change. I promise. And the further on we went, I realized, like, these are new vineyards, and this is a new orchard, and I don't remember that little community being there before. And like, I was watching things revive in what was literally the desert for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And it was about the same time that I was doing some reading in the book of Exodus, or in the book of Ezekiel. And Ezekiel 36 is this really unique prophecy when God says to Ezekiel to prophesy to the land and speak to the land specifically, and just basically saying, when the Jewish people are out of the land will be empty and desolate. And when they return, the land will be cultivated and sown, the waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt. And I began thinking, like, is this what I'm seeing? And then I started doing some research in history, just since from the time of Ezekiel till now, has anything like this happened before? And I realized that it hadn't. And so that became sort of this journey of saying, like, everybody nowadays likes to say, oh, that's prophecy fulfilled, or this is prophecy fulfilled. And you just sort of throw that term out there. But I'm very much of a concrete thinker. I ask the question of, which prophecy, and show me how it's being fulfilled. I like to have things very tangible in front of me. And so I just started approaching what I was seeing from that perspective. And that's sort of what was the motivational factor behind my first book, Israel Rising, and then Jerusalem Rising is the second one that has just come out that is continuing that series.
I like that very much. We are like that when we have groups. One of the things we do, I think it's specific, that you see a children's playground in Jerusalem and you say to them, what do you see? And they say, children's playground. No. What do you see? Children's playground. No, I want you to stop and look, what do you see? Once again, the children will be on the streets of Jerusalem. That is not just a children's playground. Yeah. So maybe not in the same pictorial way as you, but definitely that's the way we see it.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's exactly right. In fact, that portion of scripture about old men and old women being in the streets and resting on their canes, or children playing in the streets, that portion is from Zechariah 8. And Zechariah 8 is sort of my ancient prophecy that surrounds the work in Jerusalem Rising. And so in the book, we talk about that very thing, and have photos in the book of children playing in the Jewish quarter, or playing around the big golden menorah in front of the synagogue, and making that very point, is that while there's always been old men and old women in Jerusalem, and there's always been children of some kind in Jerusalem, never before are they dwelling in such safety as they are right now. Really, in the last 50 years, since 1967, within Jerusalem, there's been just a profound sense of peace and security that hasn't been there and for a very, very long time. And that's some of what Zechariah 8 is talking about. But that exact thing that you're talking about, that's the world that I'm in, is being able to help connect people. The fact that Bible prophecy is not something that's abstract or metaphorical, or just some idea that we have in our mind. It was intended by God to give us an understanding of what is coming, so that when we see those things in a very literal and tangible way, we know that, number one, he told us about it ahead of time, and number two, he told us ahead of time for a reason, that there's something else to be coming and to be ready for.
What's the difference between Israel Rising and Jerusalem Rising? It's a similar principle, it's just you're zooming in now on a specific city, and then also, why Jerusalem?
So and those are great questions. The Ancient Prophecy Modern Lens series, which is what kind of has begun with this, starts with Israel Rising. And so the concept of each of these projects encapsulates three things: some type of ancient prophecy, a bunch of history, and then an photography. And so there's no other people group in history that have any type of ancient prophecies that foretell, or ancient type of any writings that foretell the basically the history of their people, of their destruction, the desolation of the homeland, the scattering of the people, to then return to the exact same piece of real estate. Not the Chinese or the Romans or the Persians or the Greeks. I mean, nobody has any ancient writings except the Jewish people. And so it just happens to be all laid out in the scriptures. And so for that, I wanted it to be a much wider reaching aspect of interest, not of just saying like, well, this is something in the Bible, but this is something that has never happened in human history before. So the Ancient Prophecy Modern Lens series is taken an ancient prophecy and then looking at how is that coming to pass. So in Israel Rising, and as well as Jerusalem Rising, we have an ancient prophecy, we have some history, and then a now photography. So Israel Rising, the ancient prophecy is Ezekiel 36. That talks about when the Jewish people return, the branches will put forth fruit, the land will be cultivated and sown, the waste and forgotten cities will be rebuilt. God will multiply on the land, man and beast. Like there's going to be this massive multiplication of people, and continues on what God's going to do. And so then there's a whole section of history with eyewitness accounts from Christians and Muslims and Jews, describing what the land looked like for almost every century for the last 2,000 years, and it's all the same. It's empty, it's desolate. There's bands of raiding Bedouins to invasion from it's a mess up until 1948, and then everything begins to change. And so in Israel Rising, it has then and now photography from all over Israel, taking old photos from the 1840s, the 1880s to the 1940s, and then comparing those from the exact same location. I had a pro photographer, and we went to find those exact locations to reshoot the angles to show how much the land has physically responded under Israeli sovereignty. So in Israel Rising, there's over 100 photo comparisons from over 25 locations all through the land. And then with Jerusalem Rising, again, sort of the same format, looking at Zechariah 8 as the ancient prophecy, talking about, that God will saying that I will return to Jerusalem and dwell with my people. And like we just talked about, old men and old women in the streets and children, but also it talks about a time when nations will flood to Jerusalem. And then in that book, I found the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken from 1844, 1850s, 1860s, and did the same thing, went back and reshot the angles as closely as possible. Just simply because Jerusalem is not like any other city on earth for a variety of reasons. But that's the scope of the project that we've continued to work on.
Yeah, we do trips to Israel every year. Well, except during COVID, but right. Other than that, we would take groups every year, and our trips are called Israel, a nation like no other.
But then, I mean, it's the same vein for sure, and and Jerusalem specifically. I mean, there's no other nation on earth that has had a capital city like this. Like even in its desolation, the land, and especially Jerusalem, it never becomes a homeland or a significant city, let alone a capital city for any other people group other than the Jewish people. It's empty and desolate and forgotten, really up until the late 1880s when Jewish people begin returning. But aside from that, within the scriptures, there's two places in the Bible where God says He's placed His name there forever. One is in Shiloh, and the other is in Jerusalem. And when Jerusalem is being talked about in Psalms as God saying, this is the place that I've chosen to dwell. I'm dwelling here forever. Zechariah 8, I'm returning. I'm zealous for Zion. I'm returning to live in this city with my people. That alone makes Jerusalem have no equal. There's nothing else like it.
Yeah. One of our phrases we use is there's no other nation where you can stand in the past, the present, and the future in one moment in time.
That's excellent.
That's our standard. So you've answered this a little bit, but I'm curious, how did you go about this? Did you look for prophecy and then go after the photos? Did you look for the ancient photos and then say, we'll work from there forward? Or did you look at today and then say, let's go back and find a photo? I should imagine it's a mixture of that, but basically, which way did you work?
Well, as you guys know, when you walk through the old city of Jerusalem and all of the little shops, occasionally you'll see these little places that have the little black and white photos from the 1880s or early 1900s, and the more that you're in Israel and the more that you're in Jerusalem, places and you know what places look like. So then when you see these old photos, you go, wow, like I know that gate or I know that location, but it doesn't look anything like that now. And so initially I had started with Israel Rising with the intention of, maybe I can document some of this stuff just to show people who may never get a chance to come to Israel. And originally I thought, well, maybe it'll be a good advertisement for my travel company. And, maybe I wonder if anybody will actually be interested. And since then it really kind of took off. So it started with the old photos. Wanting to document it. And then as I was starting to, having those experiences of driving through the land and going, wow, so much is changing. And this is changing in such a short amount of time and a dramatic amount of time. And here's the old photos and here's some new photos. And then again, as I'm reading through the scriptures, I'm going, wait a minute, is this what is this that? Is this what they were talking about? And then, wondering if anything else like this in history has happened before. So it kind of started my own kind of research to kind of verify, is this really what I'm putting together? But for me, I think I've always loved those old black and white photos because less than 100 years ago, it just looks like a different world. It looks like a different country, a different everything, but it's literally the same spot. And so that started this whole fascination of wanting to document just that process, and not just as a then and now project, but as a way to say this is something that God spoke about 2,600 years ago, and it's happening in our day. We sometimes will view life and history through our own lens. Israel for us, for most of us, Israel's have always been there. Jerusalem has always been the capital of Israel. We don't think that 100 years ago that Jerusalem was a dump, and 175 years ago, or less than that, 160 some years ago, when Mark Twain comes through Jerusalem in 1867, and he says, it's dreary and desolate and depressing, and I don't want to live here. And today it's so dramatically different.
Yeah. I see you, Doug, actually being a fulfillment of Scripture yourself with this book, because Scripture says, raise up the foundations of generations past. And that really is what you're doing. You are bringing life to the foundations of generations past and putting on it from today. So, I don't know if others have told you that, but I really see you prophetically walking out that Scripture.
Thank you. Well, it's funny, it's the success of the book so far have really been not what I had expected. I mean, clearly God had his own expectations and his own plans that I'm kind of stumbling into. But, this wasn't something that I set out to do, to think, I'm going to capture these books and no one has ever done this before, and I'm going to do this plan. Like I said, I thought maybe it'd be a good advertisement to get some more people coming on the travel trip with the adventure trips. And since that time, I've really had sort of I guess I would say sort of a sobering moment with the Lord, of realizing that not only just are the books successful, but no one is, as my publisher had even said to me, no one, these books are unique. No one's done this before, and no one is telling the stories that you are, and no one is connecting these dots the way you are. And after a few years of the success of Israel Rising, that's still the case. And I sort of had a moment with the Lord of going, okay, I need to double down on this. And not that I wasn't giving it my focus, but recognizing that if this is, for whatever reason, something that God has given to me for a short season of time, then I want to make sure that I steward that and give everything that I have to it, and kind of give my heart and my life to it. And so that's really kind of where I'm at in the moment of figuring out how those pieces walk together. And as you walk with the Lord and kind of continue on in the journey, those things become clear, and you realize that He's been leading you without you realizing it sometimes.
I guess what better way to see some of these than as they whiz past and you fly down some rapids.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
Definitely. Another thing that I was impressed with this book is people have different learning styles. Some people learn by reading, some people learn by pictures, and some people learn, I think we all learn best experientially, which is going there. But very often you have a book where it's just full of words, and I think you lose a lot of the audience, where for me, it was the pictures that grabbed me and said, now I want to read the words. And so there is something very, very powerful, and I go back again to saying prophetic about these books, and certainly, I would validate what you feel in this moment, that God has gifted you a very precious treasure, really, in these books. So can you tell me, what did you learn through the experience of writing them, putting them together, the pictures? Can you give us some highlights of what you learned on the way?
Yeah, I mean, with that's a challenging question to answer on a couple different levels. Not challenging, but more of just detailed. I learned. I really got to learn Israel on a surface level. I got to know Israel in a very intimate way. And it was very much of a lot of these photo shoots very much felt like a treasure hunt. Like, you're waking up in the morning, you've got these old photos, you're going out to find X marks the spot, so it's like it's sort of a scavenger hunt or a treasure hunt of sorts, where, trying to find the exact locations to line them up. And so I really got to know Israel and Jerusalem, and even the back portions of Judea and Samaria where some would say that it's not safe to go. It's people are people wherever you go, whether they're Jews or Muslims or Christians, and so I had some really beautiful encounters with some locals wherever I went, which was really special. So I really got to know Israel. Number two, as far as there were so many challenges that came out along the way, that there were just so many divine appointments. So in my in both books, I wrote little sections, short blogs called Personal Encounters, of people that I met along the way, and conversations, and in Israel Rising especially, there were times where I just would have these old photos. One in particular I wrote about was in Jericho. And of course, Jericho, as you know, is Area A, which is Palestinian security, and as well as Palestinian civil control. And so there's no Jews that are there, which isn't so much a problem for me, but it just creates some other cultural challenges sometimes. And so I was going in, looking at this old photo that I had from, I want to say it was 1880, 1890, of just the Jericho plain just completely empty, and there was this old stone archway. In 1880, it was a stone archway, and I thought, what are the chances that this stone archway would be, I could even find it? And so I, just asking the Lord to lead us and guide us. And so we went into Jericho and found a sort of a market area where there's a bunch of old men sitting around drinking coffee and arguing about, politics or newspapers or whatever, as, you find really in any country. And found a guy who spoke English and explained, like, we're photojournalists and trying to document, then and now photography. And of course, they were really excited to see some of these old photos. And I held up this one photo and I said, do you have any idea where this is? And he says, oh yeah, that's the old sugar mill. It's over here. I'll take you right over. So he was someone who spoke great English. And so we ended up spending the day after we went to his cousin's shop for coffee and some, more coffee, and then some more coffee, and then on to find the sugar mill. And it was like, it was the exact place. It was like, he took one look at it and it was like, so I went into this situation thinking, I think I may end up wasting my day wandering around looking for an archway that may not even be here. but the valley was empty and beautiful, in 1880. Like there was literally nothing there. And today it's packed full. Jericho has expanded so much. There's so much irrigation and growth there now that I really wanted to capture it. But anyhow, so I say that to say that, part of what I learned sort of in that journey was just leaning on God's guidance in the work and trusting his lead and feeling like this was a project that he had given me to work on, and watching him kind of put the pieces together, even though that I didn't know how they were going to fit together. So just really continuing to kind of take the step, take the risk, take the step of faith to go after it, and connect with locals, and let God fill in the gaps and make those divine appointments. So there was a lot of really special things that were really just feeling like I was at the right place at the right time, doing exactly what the Lord had put on my heart.
So can I ask one more question for you, Andrew? Having said one, what did you learn? Can you give us a couple of challenges?
I was about to ask.
You were about to ask.
Well, my question was going to be, a lot of people seem very open to it. It still fits with your question.
Okay.
Very open to it, but did you meet any resistance from people along the way when you were trying to get certain shots?
Yeah.
Yeah, some in terms of, not because they didn't like the project, mostly because I was, they didn't want to bother with somebody to get photography, like, just taking pictures or whatever. Like, no, we don't have time for that. And so there were some times where we would get that, and then we would have to come back later and sort of climb a wall and get the right angle and kind of, dare I say, sneak into some place, get a couple of shots and quick get out. And so there was a lot of that kind of thing that was going on. And, so in Israel, as you guys probably well know, it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. And so, especially with Jerusalem Rising, I'm working with an Israeli photographer who's thinking that way. And so, so he'll say, go talk to that security guard and keep him busy while I go over here and get what we need. And then we can be on our way, and then we'll go get a falafel. And, it's just sort of that mindset. So, so there was...
We filmed a documentary out there and can vouch for that getting permissions to film, do photography, professional level is a very complicated situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so we just found it was better in some places just to show up and just act like we knew where we were going, doing what we were doing. And then by the time that somebody started yelling at us, we already had what we needed. And and off we go. Oh, so sorry, I didn't realize this was a sign. And I gave my American, like, I didn't know. I just
I'm a foreigner.
What about for you personally? What was the hardest thing for you? Or no, not the hardest. A couple of things you say, this was really challenging for me.
And on the Israel Rising photo shoot, it was a much longer period of time. It was about 4 or 5, 6, probably about 6 weeks of just daily photo shoots, and just working our way from the north to the very southern end of from Mount Hermon in the north all the way to Eilat in the south, down on the Red Sea. We shot the whole, if we had an old photo for a particular region, like we went to hunt it down. And so for me, one of the most challenging aspects of it was then, how do I communicate in a book that's very simple and very clear, like especially in Jerusalem? It's like, how do I put together a photo book of Jerusalem that is rich in biblical history, 3,000 years of both biblical and up to modern history? How do I condense that in a way that's very simple and very concrete, that can be communicated in what God is doing in photos? And so that was a real challenge and sort of a frustrating portion of that, because as an author or as a writer who's trying to communicate my heart and my ideas, much like you had said, sometimes when it's only a book of words, you sometimes can lose people. But I wanted it to be very visual. But I also wanted it, for me, as living in the West, I didn't want it to be something, excuse me, I didn't want it just to be something that American Christians would say, hey, this is really amazing, this is really special. and then, in other parts of the world, or a secular Israeli to pick it up and go, what is this silliness? I wanted it to be something that was significant, that was, that I wanted it. So I really wrestled with that a lot. And so there were days where actually writing both books, were just frustrating and infuriating, and just like, I don't even want to mess with this. And I'd put it away for a couple days, but I always felt drawn back to it. And so Jerusalem Rising, that was actually for me much harder to write, for that exact reason, was that I don't want to rehash, these amazing historians that have written about Jerusalem, or the things that have been prophesied and everything. I wanted it to be something special. And I was actually writing it. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the areas up in the Galilee, but I was writing in a little village called Perea that overlooks the Sea of Galilee. And so where I was writing it at a friend's guest house. So I'm writing it literally overlooking the sea, and I'm every now and then some friends would check in, and I'd be like, I'm ready to just let the laptop sail into the sea, let it sink into the murky depths, never to be, tie a millstone around its neck. I don't just drown it in the depths of the sea. I am so done with this book. I'm so done with this manuscript. Like, is so frustrating, and I'm having, so just that creative wrestling process was a real challenge. And there were some times where, people would probably be surprised at it, but I mean, there was a time that I was just considering, like, I'd done all of this work, I'd spent the time, spent the effort, spent the money to do these photo shoots, and yet I was still ready just to trash it all and be done and walk away. And I mean, clearly I'm glad that I didn't, but just being able to manage those frustrations, and knowing that something was there, but having trouble to connect, what was in my heart and what I felt like God was giving me with the work that I had in front of me, and just, making those two things connect, and just learning to trust my heart, and to write the stuff that was on my heart, and then sort it out later. And so I don't know if that's sort of a long rambling answer.
Yeah, but it doesn't surprise me that you said any of that, for numerous reasons, and you could tell me if I'm right or wrong. But first of all, you're going to do something about Israel that conveys not just the facts, but conveys the heart, the passion of God, the faithfulness of God, etc., etc.
The importance of today and the future.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me that you wouldn't just have sailed right through it. There's too much opposition in the spirit world for you to do that. So I think I'd be more surprised if you just said, hey, this is a breeze. Yeah, I just did it. I think that would have surprised me more. The other thing, the reason it doesn't surprise me is when you have a passion, you have values, and you have a vision in your heart, it is very difficult to put that outside and to really feel satisfied when you look at it, that it is actually captured what's inside you. And I don't know whether you look at it now and are satisfied, but certainly when we looked at it with, not the same obviously, but with a passion like that, I would say it definitely sparked that in us. So
good.
It's so one other question for you is, I've forgotten what it was now. I've been trying to remember the whole time.
So
I
good.
did.
Well, I'll add on while you're thinking
something
that,
while I remember.
while you're putting that together, I mean, you guys as ones that have done some creative projects as well, it's just sort of part of the wrestling and part of that, part of that process. And that was something that, even though you can put it away, you still always feel your heart kind of pulling back to it, of like, I need this to be done. And so, there's a sense of wonder that for me, that even is still in some of those photos. Like, I still look at some of those then and now photos for Israel Rising that we shot back in 2016, and just still look at that and go, like, just in the scope of what God promised, like this is amazing what God is doing. And so there is an aspect sometimes, I see these pictures. I've been looking at these same pictures for, years and years and years. And and it's not that it's become sort of commonplace, although it kind of has for me. It's always special when I get a message, very similar to what you're saying, where someone will say, I ordered your book. It arrived on Saturday morning, and I had other things to do. It was sort of a rainy day, but I just thought I'm going to sit down and I'm going to page through it for 5 or 10 minutes just to get a glimpse. And I realized 2 hours had gone by. I wasn't even halfway through the book, and I'm weeping over these pages. And so I'm recognizing that by God's kindness and grace, there seems to be an anointing with it that is really stirring people's hearts and are opening their eyes exactly to what you said. To me, my point was not for just a nice then and now coffee book or coffee table book. Excuse me, but it was really exactly what you said. God is demonstrating one of the most profound demonstrations of his faithfulness and his kindness through the centuries that perhaps the world has ever seen. And I hate to say that as sort of like emotionalism or trying to hyperbole or something like that, but if someone is in business or someone is in ministry for 30, 40 years and they have a good name, you would say, that person is faithful to his word or her word. Here, God is doing exactly what he said, and that was very well spelled out in the prophets 2,600 years ago. And for whatever reason, he's chosen this day and this time to begin unfolding that in a very tangible and practical way. And so for me to be able to capture some of that, in photography or on my website at doughershey.co, I have an online course where we do it in video, where I've got 10 prophecies that are fulfilled in our lifetime, going to the locations, looking at the scriptures, and then showing you like physical spots, like this is what is happening in this land that has never happened before. To be able to document some of that in our day, to me, is really special. Not just for the sake of documentation, but the biblical narrative that God has laid out for centuries is so profoundly accurate, so profoundly true. There's no mystery, there's no allegory, there's no symbolic, parallels. Although, we can pull spiritual lessons out of it, but God actually meant what he said and said exactly what he meant. And now we're at a place in time and history with technology and such, I can give you photography. I can prove it to you and provide visual evidence for that. And just the fact that God is being faithful to his word, just simply because he made a promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob about their descendants, this particular piece of land, and his love over both of those forever is astounding, because he's keeping his word in the most profound of ways that, if the nation of Israel has shown us anything in the last 73 years, is that God is doing exactly what he said. And he's keeping his word. And if he's faithful to Israel, he'll be faithful to us. He will do what he said he will do. And he's more than capable, and he's more than able to do so.
Did you think what your question was?
No, I got caught up in this. I'm not going to be thinking of the
question. So sorry.
No.
You wrote these books, and partly because you want people to connect to the history, but also to be inspired by what's happening today and the future. But there was also an element of it that you said, hopefully as well, it might inspire people to come on a tour, to come and actually experience the land. So for people that maybe they're reading the book, they're impacted by it, maybe they're thinking about possibly going to Israel, why would you say to them, look, the book is great, hopefully it inspires and impacts you, but you really need to come and experience Israel for yourself? Why would you say people need to do that?
Yeah, well, it's one thing to see some pictures, and it's something else to be there, isn't it? And so, there's when you're in the land, you are in the physical location where God has made specific promises to that people and to that land that is nowhere else on earth. And so it's a conversation that I have with my groups, and I'm sure that you guys, just in the short time we've been talking, I'm sure that you're communicating similar things. But when I have people in the land, while God sees everything, and God, his eyes are on everything, and he will hear prayers from anywhere, there are specific places on earth where God says, my eyes and my heart are there forever. In Deuteronomy 11, he says that my eyes are on this land from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And so just the fact that he said that about a particular piece of land, or even in Jerusalem, a particular city where he says, my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. Or even in First Chronicles 32, I think it is, when I think it's 32. I may have the reference wrong, but it's saying that when a foreigner comes from a far off land and comes and prays at this place, for the sake of my name, and seek, basically I'm paraphrasing, of course, but anyway, coming to seek me in Jerusalem, I will hear from heaven and I will do all that they ask. I tell my travelers when we're in Jerusalem, the fact that you're even here, God is blessed by that. And there is a biblical promise that says when you are here in Jerusalem to seek the Lord, and we're praying, and we have this conversation before taking my groups to the wall, to the Western Wall, or up on the Temple Mount. When you're asking for things from God here at this place, there is a promise that God will hear you and do whatever you ask. And while God will hear you and answer your prayers wherever you live in the world, there is a physical location that makes a promise that no other place has. And so I encourage my groups that when we're there, this is not a time to ask small. This is a time to ask God for the things that are on your heart, for destiny. Ask him for nations. If he will give us the nations as an inheritance if we ask him. Like, this is the time to ask him, because he's just so blessed that you're even coming to Jerusalem to seek him to begin with. And so Jerusalem is such a unique place, and such promises that, seeing pictures is great, seeing a video is great, but it's not unusual for travelers to get to Jerusalem and just begin to weep and have this, and I'm sure they hear it with you guys as well, about, man, I just feel like I'm home. I just have this profound sense of home. And we talk about, again, that's not a just sort of an emotional, traveler experience. You are connecting with your Father, and your Father has called Jerusalem his home. He said, this is his dwelling place. So when you're coming to where your Father dwells, you're coming home. That's why it feels like home. You are having a biblical spiritual experience with your Father in his home, just simply because he said this is where he's lived, or this is where he chose and has chosen to live forever, and you're coming to his home. And so it's just, there are experiences that you can't find in the pages of a book and looking at pictures.
Yeah, and you've got to have been there to understand that. One thing that we are very strong on when we go and when we take people, that I think often gets lost on tours. Most tours are very backward looking, but there's a whole story yet to unfold.
Yes.
The future, a whole story, which you haven't been able to photograph yet.
Well, we're working on it as it unfolds, right?
And I think to go there and to stand in prophecy fulfilled, to know that God is faithful, look at what he has done, look at the faithfulness and the details of this land, as well as the big picture of this land. If you just stop for a minute, you cannot doubt that he will be faithful in every detail unfolding into the future. I don't know whether you took a photo of the sky, but all our groups end up taking photos of the sky.
In Jerusalem.
In Jerusalem, because we say to them, look at the sky, and they all look up and look around. We say, no, you're not looking. You are not looking. And they're looking again. You are not looking. And we say to them, there's no other sky piece of sky like this. This is where the New Jerusalem is coming down from heaven. It is over this very place. And funnily enough...
They will take their cameras out and start taking pictures of the sky.
And start photographing the sky.
That's beautiful.
You know, if you can. But there is, in your book, they are books of momentum. There isn't a finish to your books. It is a... Thus far, have we taken you? Have you taken us and the story? But there's a whole lot more that I don't know how it ends. But to me, it needs to end, to be continued. Because
I communicate that very when I'm that exact thing when I'm speaking or even wrapping it up as a conclusion is that this is not the full fulfillment. Like we are in the very early days. I'm just saying if we continue reading. If we continue reading these same prophecies, the land is being revived for a reason. The city of Jerusalem is being restored for a reason. It's not just, God is doing some renovations in the city or planting some flowers to make some things look nice around the land. The land is getting ready for an arrival of a king. And if we continue to read, especially in Zechariah, further on, there is a king, there is a Jewish king that arrives on the Mount of Olives and enters Jerusalem to defend his people and begin a world reign. And that is what the city is being prepared for. And so if we, and I will often say, in terms of prophecy, if we think of prophecy as, being this much space and this much of it has come to pass in a very tangible and practical way, you can be sure that what has yet to come is going to unfold exactly what he said. And there is a Messiah that has been promised. There is a Messiah who is coming. And the city and the land, according to prophecy, the things that are happening in the land and in Jerusalem and really all throughout the region have never happened before in history. The prophets foretold it. But what also the prophets foretold is when these things are happening, there is a king that's coming very, very soon.
We are passionate about the emerging generation catching this, even from childhood. I mean, my children don't know a day of their lives when they didn't have a heart for Israel. I've got two older girls, and I sat with them when the Jews started to come out of the land of the north from Sweden, and I showed them the newspapers, and I showed them scripture and said, you are watching prophecy fulfilled. Yeah. And sadly, it is passing so many by. I mean, children don't know. Teenagers don't know. And although you didn't write your book as a children's book or a teenager's book, I would say to parents, get this book because pictorially you can give your children a heart for the land, the wonder of the land. Look, this is what it was. This is where it is. Let's have a look at scripture. This book is well suitable for parents, for whole families too. And I think in a very unique way, I'll say this guardedly, seeing as I've written one myself, but I'm not a great fan of books that are written all cartoonish for children and everything. I prefer to give them that this is how it is, enter into it. And so I just want to give it a plug in a way that get this and let it be something that is on your coffee table and accessible to your children, and let them see what the Lord has done and what he is doing in their lifetime and what he is going to fulfill in their lifetime. I mean, one thing that I love to do when we have tours, and we take all ages, children right the way through, we range right the way through, multi-generational. And when on Shabbat, we give the group maps and they go around the city and we just take Shabbat to Shabbat. But I love to take the children and the teenagers to the Mount Zion Hotel, which you obviously know very well. And you can look out over the Mount of Olives and Mount Zion. You can look over that scene. And I stand them in front of the window and I say to them, you may forget all the rest of the tour. They won't, but you may forget it, but I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember it. That's the mountain. That's the city. There's the city of David. There's Mount Zion. and talk them through it. And I say, you are looking at your future. This is your future that you are going to see unfolding through this window. And I think in a similar way with your book, you can take the next generation, children, teenagers, and say, look, you are not only looking at the past, but you are looking at your future. And so I love that. Yeah, I really want to not push that. That sounds bad.
Encourage people to invest in their families.
Doug never asked to come on here. We're not plugging his book because he asked to. We pulled
he
in.
is paying us under the table.
No.
Yes.
But
Yes,
because there is so much about it that captures our heart that I would have chased him down if he hadn't agreed to.
You don't want my mum chasing you down. That's not.
I believe you.
Yeah.
But can you just comment on what I've said, Doug, about the next generation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I appreciate you saying that, because I've been hearing from more and more homeschool communities doing exactly that, using this as not only a history lesson, but teaching Bible prophecy, or even I know that there's been several that have used the online course that I have on my website at doughershey.co for homeschooling. And in fact, a close friend of mine talked about her 9-year-old daughter just being enthralled with these going to these places and paging through the pictures and just kind of getting sucked in. And even for those that are older, I mean, in the millennial generation, that tends to be one that wants to see proof and wants to see concrete things and doesn't want to just believe the hype. They want to show me why. And so for me, I mean, that's a really easy, an easy thing to say. Look, there was a couple of years ago when I was doing some interviews for Israel Rising, in terms of people talking about, understanding what the truth is of the region and of the people. And during the interview, I think it was a podcast or a radio interview, but it was sort of an unexpected question, just sort of out of the blue. The guy, I think he wanted to be a little edgy in his questioning, a line of questioning, and he'd say, so what would you say to those that feel that in 1948 the Israelis pushed out, or the Jews pushed out the indigenous Arab inhabitants and kind of took over the land and occupied, like, how would you respond to that? And I said, well, in Israel Rising, I have over 100 black and white photos from the 1880s to the 1940s from all over the land. If you can show me where the indigenous Arab communities were already established, please show me, because I've got 100 black and white photos that show the land being empty and desolate and forgotten. And at that point, the conversation completely changed at that point, because there's this narrative that's being taught about things like that. Yes, there were Arab inhabitants. Yes, there were Bedouins. There were others that were there for sure. But this thriving community that people talked about, that there was some Israeli or some Jewish invasion, was just simply not true. And there's photographs to prove that that's the case. There's photographs to prove that, in Jerusalem Rising, in 1844 is the oldest photos of Jerusalem that were ever taken. Also in 1844, ironically, not ironically, sort of God's fingerprint in the whole thing, Jerusalem is part of the Ottoman Empire, and there's an Ottoman Sultan who had come to power a few years before, and he does a census of the Ottoman Empire with the intention of revitalizing and getting the kind of modernizing the empire. And his census of Jerusalem, which, as far as I know, is the first census of Jerusalem since biblical times, in 1844, just happens to be the exact same year as what we have the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken. And in this census, it says that there's only 15,000 people living in Jerusalem, and over 7,000 of them, as the majority, are Jewish. And so here we are in 1844. It's almost like God giving us a baseline to say, like, this is what the city was like prior to me bringing the people back. The first wave of Aliyah, the first wave of Jewish people returning, starts happening in the 1880s. This is 40 years before that. And so now the city of Jerusalem is close to over 1 million people. And of course, so that's what some of the photo comparisons in Israel or in Jerusalem Rising are about. But my point is that there's a false narrative. There's a deceptive line of teaching, of lies, of what was in the land, of what the land was like before the Jews got there, and what the land was like before the occupation. And I have photographs going back to some of the oldest days of photography, period, showing what the land looked like. And so we're not talking about any type of Arab curse, or we're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about a land that God has made promises about, that was laying desolate and is empty for centuries until the Jewish people return, and then the land begins reviving. And so in terms of being able to communicate that to millennials, to those that are turning on the news and they're hearing just outright lies, I want to be able to have this to be photo documentation of what the truth actually is. And my intention when putting the book together was not to really sort of address those topics, but I found that God has been using it for that very thing, which has been great.
Well, Doug, I think we could call this podcast "The Unfinished Story," because it is a story that is not finished yet, and maybe you'll finish it a bit further down the line.
Maybe when Yeshua starts to come back, he'll say, "Hold up, let Doug through, quick, start documenting."
But again, just want to say to people listening, this book has to be literally seen to be believed. Many other books, when it's word, you have to see this book to believe it. And we just want to thank you, Doug, for pressing through when it was hard, for being faithful to the vision, but above all, being conveyors of the heart of God through this book.
Yeah. Thank you, Doug. We really appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully we can have you back and we can dive into some other stuff as well. But thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what you mentioned about it sort of being an unfolding story is true for sure. This has become very much of a passion for me to document it, and I sort of found, at least for this season, I feel like I found my home in terms of life and purpose. And even with Israel Rising, with some of the photos in 2016, I look at those and think about those photos to me now look old because because it just keeps on going. And so I have a couple other book projects in the series that I'm working on now that's sort of continuing the story. So,
do you know what the next one will be?
Yeah, all of the work has already been done, and I'm putting the content together. But the next one will be called Aliyah Rising, and it's documenting the journey of the people back to the land.
Okay, so will you contact us when it's about done, and we'll have you back again?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to do that, because that's just all of these stories. I did these interviews, prior to COVID. I interviewed over 30 pioneers of the state of Israel that came to the land between, I think the oldest was 1946 to up to 1970. And so interviewed them about their Aliyah experience, why they came, what they found when they got to the land. So 30 people from 19 different nations, from 5 different continents, all Jews feeling this pull back to the land, whether it's by persecution or in some of these testimonies are amazing. I'll save them for later, but of Jews that just had someone arrive from the Jewish agency saying, we're starting a nation, it's time to come home. No persecution, no anti-Semitism, entire villages like in India and other these places just picked up in Yemen, in Morocco, just picked up and moved to the land because we're starting a nation, and because just not one or two families, entire villages moving, just stunning. I cried through half of the interviews because they're just so powerful. But that's the project that I'm working on right now.
Wow. Well, that's enough to whet the appetites. We will leave it on that cliffhanger and look forward to finding out more about those stories and that whole journey. Doug, thank you so much. Again, if you're listening, go to the description box. The links will be there. Encourage everyone to go buy the book, support what Doug's doing, and not just that, but invest in you and your kids, the next generation. So Doug, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, guys. This has been great.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.